This is Tabletop Babble, and I'm Amber. Hello! Today on the show, I chatted with streamer, podcaster, and game designer Amr Ammourazz. We sat down on May 24th and talked about running games for the first time, our experiences with Pathfinder, getting into TTRPGs via podcasts, of course, some more Marvel talk, and more specifically about the social issues being told through stories. Chimera RPG, a game they're working on with Ryan Bolter, and the activism they are currently focusing on. Unfortunately, there was not a lot of opportunity to showcase their penmanship, which I deeply regret not providing for them, but oh well. Hello, and welcome to Tabletop Babble, Amr, and for my listeners, would you please introduce yourself, your pronouns, and what you do in the space?
Sure. Hi, I'm Amr Ammourazz. I use they, she pronouns, and I like to joke that I exist in the corner of the space where the puns sort of vibe in the liminal space of your consciousness. That's sort of where I exist. I do TTRPG writing, game design, podcasting, streaming, crying, all the necessary parts of a work-life balance. Whatever is around, try to uplift BIMPOC creators. That's sort of my vibe.
I love the crying thrown in there. I don't think we talk much about how crying is a thing.
It's a necessary part of the cycle. It shouldn't be, but it is.
It's very much a cleansing aspect.
Yeah.
Like, I recently just had a good 40-minute cry on a drive home from dealing with social stuff, and afterwards I felt kind of refreshed.
Don't get me wrong, I think crying is super useful. I just think we ideally would have one day a world where no one would have to cry.
Yes.
But in our current world, crying is super necessary for survival.
Yes, truly it is. So TTRPG stuff, you said that, I've seen you on Twitter. I know that you do podcasting and game design. But when I first meet somebody, I kind of want to know, how did you get started? You could either talk about your actual first experience playing RPGs or just even online, whatever you'd like.
Yeah, it's all sort of like one fast snowball experience. It started my freshman year of college 4 years ago now. One of my dorm mates / future roommate / close best friend had a Pathfinder red box that they got from a yard sale. And none of us had ever played TTRPGs, but he had the box. It was one of those things that was like, it was one of the free things that I'd always really wanted to get into, that I just always heard about. TTRPGs, Zelda, and more anime than just Pokemon. There were all the things of parts of nerd culture that a lot of my friends were into that just for whatever reason I never got into, and there was an opportunity to do one, so I went for it. I ended up GMing before even playing, so I GM Pathfinder as my first ever experience. Super easy game to GM if you've never GM Pathfinder. I can't get through that sentence without laughing.
So so Pathfinder. I always find it funny because, I started out as a player and GMing was so scary to me. But if you have, no experience whatsoever going into it GMing, did you have any worries or apprehensions about it?
It's hard because, writing is a thing I've always done. I've always enjoyed writing and storytelling and, collaborating with people on stories. And so it just kind of felt like an extension of that. I never really experienced a lot of traditional GMing stuff, so even though I had some baggage that was just built in by reading the Pathfinder stuff, I had always lent towards more the type of GMing that indie games lead themselves towards, of collaborative storytelling and going based off what the group does. And so I kind of just would pull up the PFSRD, look up a random monster, and I used an adventure guide to help as well at the time, so that also made it a lot easier.
Yeah, because I think my first experience with Pathfinder was there was some sort of group, something of the Shining Jewels, or I can't remember what it was, but they put out lots of modules and stuff and ran games at conventions and things. That experience running Pathfinder, what was that? Even though you used a guide or whatever, what was that experience like for you? That first time?
It was mixed. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed hanging out with friends. Pathfinder itself, kind of for me, kind of not for me. There's I love building characters in Pathfinder. I don't enjoy playing it that much. I almost fell off of TTRPGs from it. There was just sort of a mismatch between the group wanted to play it more like Pathfinder expects you to play it, and I wanted to play it more roleplay. And so it was just a matter of me and the group not meshing in terms of what we wanted out of the game at the time.
Sure. Did you have any sort of like role play experience? Not in RPG before, so it was just nothing naturally. What about like theater or stuff?
Nope, I never really gotten into a lot of that. I would like, as a kid, I'd do a lot of stuff like, writing fan fiction and stuff in my head, in self-insert stuff, but like never anything with other people, never theater, never any of that.
That's fun. Because, like, I'm thinking back to, like, my first TTRPG experience, and I played Dungeons & Dragons. I played 3.5, which was, like, Pathfinder kind of, like, was the game that we played after 3.5. Yeah. And I came at it very, like, I'm going to play it by the book.
Okay.
And in all those old books, they didn't really talk to you about, like, how to describe things or, like, conversation. So I was just like, I cast Fireball. I cast Magic Missile.
Yeah. Curious, like, I don't know, what was your feel of 3.5? Because I know that it's vaguely like Pathfinder is what a 3.5 continued development, but I don't know much about 3.5 itself.
So 3.5 is like my only real experience with D&D. Like, it was literally the only D&D I played, and I played it for 7 years. And then I haven't played D&D since. I would say that Pathfinder is a very good progression. Like, I feel like when I played Pathfinder, I felt at home in it, and it felt easier. Just like some small things were streamlined. Like a lot of the skills were condensed into like one skill. Pathfinder is very crunchy, and once you get into like high level, like I think the last character I played was like level 16 wizard, and fighting became, okay, tonight this 4 hours is just combat.
Yep. I think the furthest I ever got in Pathfinder was like level 10-ish, and even that got a lot.
And like when you said like you're more into the role play, it's not very fun for people who are wanting that experience to sit and wait 10 minutes before it's your turn to go.
10 minutes is being generous, but yeah.
Yes. Yes. So then moving from that GMing experience, and it almost made you like turn away from TTRPGs, like what brought you back to it though?
It was podcasts. One of my players, the same one who had Pathfinder Red Box, had started listening to Film Reroll. So he rec that to me. I listened to them. I binged all of their content, which wasn't a lot at the time, because this was about like the year that they'd started. And then I was like, well, now I want more. And most of it was done in the very classic, like, freshman engineering student style of playing Civ 5 at like 2 a.m. while listening to a podcast. So I binged a lot of other podcasts and started joining the like online community from there. I binged Campaign first, joined the One Shot Discord, and from there it snowballed into meeting more players, playing online games. The first game I ever played as a player and that I got to play that was an indie game was Masks. And from there got roped into design, and here we are.
Oh yeah, it's just like, it's so funny because like a lot of people I do have on the show, it's like, little middling like experience, in the real world, and then they find this online community, and then it's just like boom. So Mask, tell me, like, was that a game where you got to then do that role playing that you were craving?
Yeah, that was a game that definitely gave me that. Both, like, the system and all the players going in wanted to do that. And so it just started with a one-shot that ended up being a 3-year-long campaign with us rotating our GMs, just because we had a lot of fun.
Was that done for a podcast, or was that just purely online?
Just purely online for our own sake. Lost forever to time, and except in our hearts.
Well, that's...
Yeah.
It's one of those things that once you get into podcasting, I always tell people, like, you have to have at least one game that is not content creation.
100%.
Because otherwise it just burn out.
Yep. And like even now with doing more streaming stuff and more podcasting stuff, I still try to keep 1 to 2 games just for fun. We even have like one weekly game with friends that like half the time we don't even play. We just get together and just chat. Sometimes we play our session, but it's Yeah.
You have to have that. That's so good. It's like, and it's also for me, like personally, I've always loved actual plays that lean more towards actual play, where it's truly like just a couple friends at the table, and sometimes it devolves into like 30 minutes of just talking about whatever's going on, and I really love that.
Yeah. That's part of what, like, I think, like, I also really enjoy audio dramas, and so to an extent I enjoy some more tightly edited actual plays, but a lot of the appeal early on, and still to me, of actual plays that I find myself turning to, especially when I'm like, if I gotta choose between an actual play and an audio drama to listen to at the time, if I want to listen to an actual play, it is for that reason, right? Because that's what makes them stand out a lot of the time for me. It's just that experience of being at the table a bit.
And I love feeling when people like each other, like not just like, oh, we are at the table, we like each other, we are playing a game together, but like you can tell that they've been playing together for a while.
Or at the very least, like, you can hear fun in people's voice. Like, that's a thing that's hard to fake on a genuine level. And so when people are enjoying themselves at the table, even if they're like first meeting up for that group, you can still hear it.
So then, okay, so you have your online mass game and you're getting into the online space. When did you start like, okay, I'm on a podcast or that kind of stuff? Because I don't know, like, how did that all happen for you, and where are these things?
It sort of happened on a series of accidents. Basically, I was trying to flashback in time to Kid Me. One of a book series that I come across that ends up being like one of my favorite is called Skullduggery Pleasant. That reaction that you just gave me is the reaction that most people give because it wasn't published in the US until recently. It's by an Irish author, and it was published by a British branch of, I think, a big publishing house still, but only published in Britain and internationally, and not the US. So most Americans don't actually know it. No, neither do Canadians. But it's essentially pretty standard YA trope of like 12-year-old person discovers the magical world. She finds out about like magic, realizes she's connected to it in some ways, goes on a mystery solving spree with a skeleton detective, as you do.
I love it, skeleton
The
detective.
title character, Skullduggery Pleasant.
I am writing this down because I am very interested in it.
It's very much like in a parallel vein, I think, to Percy Jackson and stuff that I also read as a kid. Mm-hmm. And like the authors also kind of followed a similar path to Rick Riordan, where there was the first series of 8 or 9 books. He finished those, and then he was like, yeah, my greatest regret was not having queer characters, or as many explicitly queer characters. So the second series, the main character comes out as bi. There are trans and non-binary and gender-fluid characters that are both main and or side characters. So that's been nice. Like, that's been one of those things like, yay, the author that I liked is doing the right thing.
Okay, so I need to know time frame. When would you have been reading this?
I started reading this, I think I picked up the first one when I was like 8.
Okay.
And the character's been consistently 3 to 4 years older than me when I've like read each book, and it's been coming out, and it's still coming out now as I'm reading it. So it's been one of those things where it's like it's aged with me, and it's aged in meaningful ways. Like my biggest critique of it would be that it's really white in terms of its representation, but like things like the most recent book, a huge arc for the character was struggling with trauma and depression, and like well done, actually like exploring stuff like addiction as a bad coping mechanism, but as a coping mechanism, and like tools to deal with trauma safely. And I think that was meaningful to me because as a person who's dealt with similar issues with depression and stuff, right?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to know, like, if it's something that's been growing with you, and to have that author who is like open to exploring these themes and topics is huge, because I mean, my stuff growing up was like, I don't know, Babysitter's Club, which is, they have some things, but not heavy. I don't know, like of course I read Harry Potter, which is a huge thing.
I'm thankful. So my parents tried to get me into it, just not because they knew anything about it, just they knew it was like the popular thing, and they knew I liked to read. So they got me the first few books, and I couldn't get past the first book. I never finished the first book, and I'm very thankful to younger me, given everything that's happened in retrospect.
With Harry Potter, yeah, because it's like when you grow up with this thing that you cherish so much, and then you find out, oh, there's a lot of problems here. Can I love this like I used to love this? Nope. I can't. And I've talked about on other, I think I actually talked about with Morgan on when she was on for Tabletop, Again, listeners, if you don't know what we are talking about specifically with J.K. Rowling, she is very much a transphobic person and is not good. And there's lots of problems with things like, I don't know, your one Asian character named Cho Chang, like stuff like that. When you're a kid, you don't really realize it because that's what you're presented.
Yep.
But as an adult looking back, so I'm happy that you got that you did not get hooked into Harry Potter, and therefore did not have your heart crushed.
Yep. And like, don't get me wrong, there's still some problematic media I consumed and still enjoy. Like Star Wars is a franchise I love, and like, we don't have time to list everything wrong with Star Wars in a 40-minute interview, as much as I love it. And like, listeners can't see this, but I have a Sabine Wren jacket like right on my chair here. But like, yeah, that was nice. It was also like, because the second book series started coming out right as I was figuring out my gender and sexuality stuff. And so that was my first introduction to gender fluidity, actually. Wasn't perfect. The offer gets better with it going forward. But it was still an introduction to a concept that I'd never seen anywhere else that helped me look more into my own stuff.
Which I think is fantastic. And I'm happy for the generation after us who is going to have more and more media that helps them, because just because it wasn't present when we were kids doesn't mean it isn't there in people, because lots of stuff I mean, I'm finding it now. For me, I'm finding it through games, like especially in the TTRPG space, where I'm finding that representation I missed out on as a kid, and that is now helping me. Do you is that something that is happening for you as well?
Yeah, anyone who played games with me as I was sort of figuring stuff out earlier on could track my sort of like, if you tracked my character's pronouns, they heralded my own shift in gender by about a month or two.
This is really fun. I would love to share this with you, because for me, I was playing a character who was completely devoid of any like sexual anything, didn't want romance, didn't want anything, and was very like against it and like whatever for 7 years. And then I was like, oh, asexual is a thing.
There are so many things with gender, sexuality, romantic inclinations that just even talking about it poorly would at least talk about it and get people to think about it, right? Like, there are so many different ways of understanding attraction, whether it is simply you don't experience a certain type or you experience it in certain circumstances that people just aren't told to think about or are actively told they're wrong for thinking about, that I wish we had more resources, and we are starting to have them, which is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk more about that kind of stuff, like, I think it's, to me, this is one of those weird, like, podcast interviews where I'm like, oh, I have listeners that I should be talking about your work and who you are, but this is important subjects, right? I think it's important. So, yeah, I'm interested in, like, what have you been seeing? Like, you're saying there's more resources here now, and if you can, is there a tie to it in TTRPGs?
Yeah, I mean, I think the indie scene, especially, indie scenes in most things tend to be a lot more queer and a lot more diverse. Now, their responses to that can vary. A lot of them will end up pushing out BIMPOC voices or will end up pushing out queer voices depending on the spaces and whatnot. But there are a lot of both in the TTRPG space who are pushing for change and pushing for recognition. One really awesome and hugely successful and great example recently is Thirsty Sword Lesbians, which is a book full of wonderful queer representation, that ties vaguely into my work because I got to write a stretch goal for it. Yeah. And it's a game I enjoy because, one, it explicitly puts queer identities up front. Two, it represents diverse gender identities and the diverse meaning of the word lesbian throughout the book in multiple ways. And three, it also allows room for different romantic and sexual inclinations as well, despite the title leaning towards being specifically more like thirsty. People generally assume has to do with sexual attraction and lesbianism as well, but like the word thirsty can be reinterpreted into different forms of attraction, and lesbians can be aromantic and asexual while also being interested in pursuing that type of relationship. And the book does a solid job of bringing that to the forefront and grossed like a huge amount on Kickstarter, which means a lot of people are now seeing that.
I was excited for it. Like, obviously, I showed the book to you. The listeners, of course, did not see, but I have it right here next to my, over here with my other books close to me. And queer diverse people are here and they are literally thirsty for RPGs.
Yep.
And it is shown here, and I get really frustrated at times when people who may not be accepting, might not be welcoming, might not understand whatever, or even just outright bigots, see this happening. And they're like, oh, not my TTRPG space, and like clutch at their pearls. And it just frustrates me because here are people who want to engage and are people first. And they want to engage, and there's obviously a need for it, and yet they still pearl clutching.
I'm going to reference a mildly obscure meme, but those people can go back to their Christian Minecraft server with their Winnie the Pooh bouncer and just stay over there.
It's like, we're not taking away, you can still play your games. No one's saying don't play your game, like, you can't play games anymore, but like, we would like to also be included in games.
Yep.
Oh, that's good. Yes. I don't know. Anyway, so I want to know what you wrote for Thirsty Sword Lesbians.
So I wrote the Super Science Sapphics, which is a superhero setting that is my attempt to write the base for the type of superhero stories, or one of the types of superhero stories that I would like to see. Superheroes is another genre that I love that is also hugely problematic. Some of its modern implementations being specifically like stuff like military propaganda, but also generally in a lot of its basis of upholding the status quo and like police apologism and the like. Even though people will often like to forget that, the creators initially, like Stan Lee, and I'm blanking on the other creator of Marvel, were both Jewish and writing directly post and or during World War II in response to that, and were specifically writing radical fiction, and it stayed radical a lot of the times. Like a lot of the early Captain America comics that then get sanitized, or like our modern era, are relatively radical, and some even I would consider like still left-leaning and or just flat out left by our current standards. And people will erase those and reimagine them to our modern times. But this is my attempt to do something that I would love to see more of in superhero stories. So it focuses more on a city where the point of being a superhero is first and foremost protecting and upholding the community and solving and tackling problems, and solving and tackling whatever problems the quote-unquote villains are causing, right? Or whatever causes someone to become a quote-unquote villain. The only true villains in the setting are external. So there's a character who is aptly named the Capitalist, who she comes from outside to try to invest in the town called Weha, and to steal their technology and use it and appropriate it for her own capitalistic gains. She is one of the only direct villains named in the book. The rest of the prompts are all stuff like, you go to prom, or there is an alien spaceship crashing down, and like, the goal is not to just stop the alien spaceship, it's to also help the aliens on the ship, because being a hero means helping everyone.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, okay, so I recently just got into superhero stuff, like, and my touch point is Marvel. Because that's the most prominent, easily accessible stuff for me right now, is to watch, on Disney Plus. And I watched the MCU for the first time this past winter. So are you a Marvel? Like, have you? Okay. Yeah. There's nodding happening.
there's a lot of nodding. My dad was a Marvel comics person growing up. So, like, I'm Egyptian, my family's Egyptian, but my dad went through middle and high school, or the start of high school, in New York City. And so he brought back a lot of stuff, a lot of habits with him, one of which he picked up was reading comics. And so he continued doing that. And so he took us, like, to see the first Iron Man movie the moment it came out back in 2010, 2009, whenever that started. Time is fake, but yeah.
Time is an illusion, I'm like, I don't know how time works. Okay, so I get excited because it's like a whole new, this genre is like, I've had like touchstones here and there, and but this is like a new genre for me that I'm like here's my birthday present that I got this year, which is a friend got me crocheted Wanda and Vision. They're little cute little dolls.
Beautiful.
Because those are my two favorite characters, because the exploration of trauma with Scarlet Witch is an interesting subject for me. But I want to know, like, did you watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier?
I did.
I talking about the setting that you made and talking about police and the world. What are your? I feel like you have thoughts. I can feel them from across the internet.
I do have a lot of thoughts. Falcon and the Winter Soldier is such an interesting piece because you could almost know, like, knowing once they gave you the setup, I could write exactly where it went. I couldn't write the specifics of how they executed it, but I could tell you where it was going to end up. I was surprised. It was still not, like, it's still not my ideal position, but I was still surprised by the degree of speech that Falcon got at the end. Because normally when you get a setup of, like, oh, this person is, arguing for a good cause, but they're going too far, they're the villain, they don't get too much credence given to them. And I think we get a little bit of pushback in some of the stuff with, say, Black Panther and Falcon the Winter Soldier, where their points are to a degree validated, but it isn't done in a way that actually directly helps the person that was most affected there, right? Like, the person still ends up losing and suffering and being labeled a villain for it. And the type of story, like, that ideally gets told in this setting is if someone comes like, hey, there's a problem with our society, and, like, X group isn't being properly taken care of, or Y need isn't being met, the job of the hero would then be to help address that, right?
Right.
Because that's what heroes do.
I really enjoy... At first, I didn't know if I was going to enjoy the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the series, because I wasn't really drawn to those characters in the actual MCU. And I was surprised at where they took it, because I could feel, like you said, the people who should be, in their Winnie the Pooh, whatever, bouncer, would be very upset with a lot of the theme and how it went as it played out. But for me, my only gripe, I think, is just the pace of the storytelling. It was too much for 6 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
It felt very rushed at the end.
Interesting. Yeah,
is that a valid opinion?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Like, to me, honestly, it felt like the only episode that I was like felt like perfectly paced throughout was the second to last episode.
Yes, I liked that one.
That was a really, like, that also had a lot of what I really enjoy from superhero fiction, which is just them being mundane people and, like, dealing with life struggles. I agree that the last episode was rushed, and that also brushes over a lot of, like, their apologia of a dude who was basically functionally a Nazi, right? Like,
yes.
we're not going to sugarcoat it here.
Like, it didn't make any sense to me why he literally killed somebody publicly in the middle of a square, and then he's right there helping everybody at the end. I was like, I don't make any damn sense.
You set him up for a villain arc, just go all the way. But they couldn't because, well, you can't make the U.S. military look bad. And
that's why I brought it up when you were talking about the setting that you made and, like, what I saw in this media where, MCU talk is relevant because we take our inspiration, we put it into games, and I'm going to call it, this is an MCU podcast right now that's related to games, everybody. This is the second one that I've talked about Marvel.
But, like, yeah, I think my biggest, like, touch points from the MCU would be Black Panther, Thor Ragnarok. The types of stories that... Thor Ragnarok is great because, one, it's just a really fun, silly movie with a lot of just beautiful colors. Tessa Thompson. Do I need to say more?
No, I'm in it. I love it.
I could have just stopped with Tessa Thompson and started there and it would have been fine. But Taika Waititi is also, like, specifically comes from a perspective of being indigenous, Jewish, and a person of color. And that shows in the story. And even if you don't know that, you can see some of the themes, especially when, like, Asgard is a people, not a place, right? Like, that concept that is central to that and that type of story is what makes Thor Ragnarok so good. Because he's allowed to do that.
It is. I think I love lots of different of the movies for different reasons. I love the Spider-Man ones, because they are what I imagine what playing Mask would be like.
It's very good for that.
And then I love Thor Ragnarok because of everything that you said already. Beautiful movie, well done. Just I love it. It's fun. And then my other movie that I really, really like is actually, was it Civil War?
Okay, yeah.
And I think it's because of the other themes that get brought up where it's like just dealing with Iron Man's trauma and how his trauma affects his judgment and his decision making and causes friction.
Civil War would be a stronger movie if they did not use the framing of the legislation. and they just made it about that trauma conflict, because that's really what the conflict is about. The whole superhero legislation thing is just, there is too much layers of that to get into. The one thing I'll say on it for now is, as a kid, I was always very confused about why anyone would be on the side of the legislation, from a simple, like, why would you trust the government to properly respond to situations? Now, as an adult, I realize that's because I don't trust the cops or the way the military handles things or the way the UN handles things to actually get meaningful change done, because their systems are designed to uphold the status quo.
I mean, they kind of touched on it too in Falcon and Winter Soldier. In my mind, is the B plot. In my mind, the A plot is Falcon coming into becoming Captain America.
Yep.
But the whole whatever, I can't remember what they were called. It was the Flag Smashers. Is that what their name was? I think it was Flag Smashers.
Yes, the Flag Smashers.
That whole thing was about that too. It's like legislation not taking care of people. So.
And obviously the best part of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier was when the Dora Milaje showed up.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, holding up a little figure.
As is, I think, Nakia specifically. No, not one of the ones who showed up, but still.
Here we are showing each other our little figures and toys of MCU.
Well, yeah.
Sometimes, winning a game isn't about dealing the most damage, or drawing the most cards, or making any measurable contribution towards victory. But hey, just because you don't have the stats doesn't mean you're not a f***ing gamer god, alright? Enter The Intangibles, a podcast on the Geekspective Network, where me, Kenny, and my brother Matt break down all the things that are hard to quantify in games. All kinds of games. We're talking classics like Sonic's the Hedgehogs, and chess, and 3D Pinball Space Cadet. Great game, by the way. We're talking new releases like
insert latest trending games on Twitch here.
Single player, co-op, competitive, card games, board games, role-playing games, play-by-mail games, the Wakes. We do deep dives into our favorite games, digging into the intangibles that make them great and the intangibles that will make you a better player, and hey, maybe even a better person. Check out the Intangibles on whatever the heck platform you're listening to right now.
So trying to bring this back into why this is relevant to RPGs, I think it's just a lot of times we're trying to create stories, right?
Yep.
And we create stories that really impact, that we have experience with, that we know that we want to work through and everything. So I'm interested in knowing more of your writing. Like you wrote for Thirsty Sword Lesbians, but have you made any games, other modules, stuff like that?
Yeah, I've done a lot all over the place. My biggest sort of personal project, I've been working with my co-designer Ryan Bolter on Chimera for the last... They've been working on it for just over 3 years. I've been working on it with them for the last 2. And that is a attempt at creating a monstrosity out of spite. The more serious answer is a PBTA game that is specifically about creating sort of custom settings and game experiences by taking the genre packages that we've created, or that once it's released other creators also hopefully will create, and merging them together to create a world by combining 2 or more genres, and then creating a unique character by combining 2 playbooks.
Okay, I need to know how this works. I love it.
So basically, the way it works is, let's say, like right now, the 3 genres we're working with are fantasy, because it was a TTRPG standard, and that's one that Ryan started with. Magical girls, because A, they're great, and B, Ryan's Twitter handle and everything handle is Lord Neptune. So that should tell you everything you need to know about them and their interests. And then the last one, surprise, surprise, is superheroes. To be fair, I didn't make any of these choices because Ryan had started this game before I had hopped on. These were all made by them. It just works out.
Perfect.
But you take 2 of them, and there's a list of tropes you select from each, or you can write your own tropes. But we give you tropes to help guide the world building, and then you create a unique world that combines the genres. And then you create a character with a primary and secondary playbook that on Google Sheets, we just have them nicely like lined up next to one another. And then in physical, you fold them into one another to create a booklet that combines them.
That's so cool. I love it. So, I mean, you're at the stage where you're getting close to releasing stuff. You've done playtesting at all or stuff?
Yeah.
Because I'm interested in knowing, like, what has what combos and stuff has come out of your playtests.
So we've play tested it a lot over the past few years, and right now, and so like we've tried every combo, and we've had weird settings from like sky archipelagos to an entire city that's run like an anime high school to which was a magical girl superhero combo to a world that was shaped like a D12 and each side was a different biome, like a bad sci-fi novel.
It sounds. I love that cheesy shit. So.
Yep, exactly. And so most of what we did was like just targeted playtests whenever we had time. But right now, both Ryan and I are running a stream of it. I'm running one on Utopia on Fridays, every other Friday, and then on the alternating Fridays, Ryan is also running one of their own. And then we recently released on itch the first playset that has the 3 genres and 6 playbooks for each genre to get you started.
That's so cool. I'm writing things down. So if you see me looking down, it's not because I'm not interested. It's because I have to write things down or I forget them because of an ADHD brain.
Yeah. Like when you were asking me earlier about like, oh, how did you start? I was like, shit, I have to remember.
I feel so bad because like anytime somebody because I'm the same way. Someone's like, Amber, tell me about X. I'm like, oh, what? Okay, I gotta physically move around now to get my brain started so I can remember.
Yep.
You're fine. So, that's so exciting because there's a board game that I really like called Smash Up, where you take 2 like monster types and also I think there's another game that's like, I think some of the most fun, interesting constraint to have like 2 things and then, okay, let's make something fun with these 2 constraints. So wow, okay, cool. So I wrote down Utopia, so I know where it's at. Because Utopia, I've had Mariam, talked with Mariam, and then I've talked with Morgan, obviously.
And Morgan is also part of Ryan's play stream.
I was gonna say,
Chimera.
And that's Serena Bezos for every.
Not my Utopia one, the other one.
Yeah.
So if you get the one on Utopia, you get me and a bunch of awesome cool people. If you get the other one, you get Morgan. It's great.
Yes. What's the plan as far as getting it to be out there?
The biggest thing, so with the money we were able to get off of it, we've commissioned the remaining art for the playbooks. We want to get a sensitivity consultant for the Magical Girl playbooks, just to make sure that we aren't doing any harm with any of the tropes there. And then commission some more art so that we have some more art to show off, because art's what makes a Kickstarter run. And then, playtesting a little bit more, fine-tuning stuff. But we're gearing up, hopefully, to do our big crowdfunding push sooner rather than later. I won't say when because I don't want to be like, yeah, we're doing it in June, and then it's like, hey, guess what? It's 2023 and we still haven't done it. But I'm not gonna hold you to anything. I won't ask for a hard date. Just like I'm excited to hear it. I'm excited to watch it and see how it plays. So is this the big one right now, or do you have other things that are going on for you as well? Yeah, I think that is like the biggest personal one. I've done a few small personal things, and I've got ones in the works, but nothing compared to the scope of this one. But I've also done like a bunch of other freelance things here and there. I wrote a game in the Ultimate Micro RPG book. But I've done stuff for whether mechanical design or settings or stuff for various things. And then sometimes I scream on the internet about math.
Oh boy. I am not a math person. I was gonna say, is there a place where people can find like all your game stuff? Is that on itch as well?
Yeah, itch, or the Chimera stuff is specifically on its own itch. We have a Chimera itch, and you can find that by play.chimera.games. We'll just redirect you there.
So I was gonna ask you, it's like, do you want freelance projects? Are you currently looking for more writing stuff for games and things? Is that something that you are ongoing?
Yes-ish. I mean, right now, most of my energy is going towards activism stuff. If you've been on my Twitter recently, I've been investing a lot of my energy into raising awareness about issues going on in Palestine right now.
Yeah, actually, I saw that you were tweeting about it. If you're willing to talk about it, I'm more than happy to hear what's going on, because I saw the hashtag podcasts against apartheid.
So basically, for a quick primer of summarizing a lot of information, but if you have not been paying attention for Palestine, there's been, for about just over 100 years, there's been a settler colonial state that has been actively enforcing an apartheid and an ethnocide on the Palestinian people. And I put out a huge thread that has a lot of basic background information on how it started, how it's continued. That's on my Twitter, and as well as active steps you can take. So I won't hash them all out here. But one of the projects one of my Palestinian friends has started, who's in the audio drama space, Serena Rahal, and that is the hashtag podcast against apartheid tag. And so it's based on the apartheid-free zone movement, which is part of BDS. And it's essentially making a organization, a business, a space specifically dedicated to the principles of BDS, which is boycott, divest, sanction. And so that is making sure that where you put your money, the people you invite, etc., are not supporting the state of Israel and the act of genocide it is committing in any way, shape, or form. And so the idea there is making sure, if you're writing TTRPGs, you're not printing or promoting with anyone who is doing that. You are not bringing on guest writers who are doing that. And the podcast movement is specifically about making sure not to use hosting services, website services, guests, etc. that do that. And so my friend started that hashtag, and I've been trying to push it as well into the TTRPG space. And it's been wonderful seeing the reception by a lot of actual play podcasts and TTRPG creators taking on that commitment and taking on the promise to maintain those steps going forward.
Yeah, that's a lot of emotional and mental labor that you're doing, and so thank you.
If I'll point out one specific link, if you look up the Decolonize Palestine website, it is probably the best by miles 101 primer. That also goes into like 201 and 301 levels, but it will cover you everything from the basics to the advanced information on the history of the situation, as well as some of the tactics that are used. Because that information is deliberately obscured. Like, it has deliberately been buried, erased, obscured, or made taboo to talk about. And so the idea that it's not as complicated as it feels, but it is designed specifically to feel as an unapproachable or ununderstandable situation by Israeli PR campaigns. Like, that is the deliberate tactic they've pushed to make it a thing that people don't talk about, because it's an effective tactic, right?
Yeah.
If it feels too much to talk about, then you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
People's careers have been specifically buried as a result of like speaking out about Palestine, especially journalists. It's happening less now. Like, the big reason why this feels different to a lot of activists, like this past few weeks versus the past decades, is that for once people are actually speaking up. There is still some stuff happening with people's careers being buried. There's still stuff more directly happening. I don't want to get into details without content warnings.
Yeah,
but
sure. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it feels different now?
I think social media is probably a huge part of it. So it's sticking on social media. People having... I honestly don't know what has changed in people's consciousness. I'm wondering if maybe it's things to do with people just generally being more willing to stand up. Maybe it's a result of like what we went through in the Trump era. Maybe it's a result of Black Lives Matter protests and people finding more confidence to speak up. Whatever it is finally happening.
Yeah, I mean, for me, just my own limited feelings, emotions, perspectives on everything, to me, it just feels like yet another, it's like, wait, what, this has been happening for how long now? I think that might be part of it, and plus social media.
Social media just makes it huge, and just more people are just less afraid of the consequences. Maybe part of it is also that the pandemic has like put people in situations where the consequences aren't as bad, or they're not as scared of the consequences for that anymore. But yeah,
I mean, and thinking about accessibility and stuff, I mean, I'm not trying to relate this back to TTRPG space, but I kind of am. But whatever, it's kind of like the same with like having, for me, coming online and realizing that there are entire groups of people that represent me exist. Then also, hey, I can have access to tools online now where I can get them money or support or whatever makes it easier. And maybe that's another part of it too. It's like people who used to be afraid of financial destruction or their careers being buried, they now could put out there, hey, I need help, and get that help that they actually need.
And I think a big part of it is one of the big tactics that was done specifically in the case of Israel is conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. They specifically pushed that rhetoric. And so anyone who spoke up in opposition to the genocide was labeled as anti-Semitic. And that, A, discredits a lot of actual anti-Semitic attacks and anti-Semitic violence that occurs all across the world that is awful and should be condemned. And B, also erases the active ethnocide that they're doing. And there are so many ways that was specifically pushed. And a lot of Jewish people and Jewish organizations have been speaking up about that and speaking against that framing. And that has played a huge part in it, because that means people are feeling more comfortable not getting dismissed and shut down for anti-Semitism in this regard.
It's heavy.
But
heavy.
to dive back to TTRPGs.
Yeah, well, I was going to say this is actually a transition where we can, like, you know, you talked about if people want to know about this, they can go to that website, Decolonize Palestine, if you want to know, and I will go afterwards too, because I would like to know more about the actual history. But if people want to see one where, you know, what you've been putting out, like you said, most of your energy has been going to this activism, where can people find you? Where can they find your games? Where are your things?
Twitter is sort of the central hub for everything. So my Twitter account is Ammourazz, and that's sort of my tag everywhere, but the Twitter works as the spot to find out if I'm doing streaming stuff, if I'm doing on podcasts. I hope to have like more consistent projects and stuff to talk about, but a lot of my stuff is like one-off or appearing. Like I said at the start, I exist in the liminal space where puns are, and I show up, make a few puns, contribute to your thing, and disappear into the void again. So if you want to find out whatever newest thing I'm showing up to add puns to, you think I joke, but they did a pun counter for one episode of our Chimera stream, and it hit 40 in a 2-hour stream.
Okay, so here's the thing. I used to be a person who hated puns, but it's, you know, it's one of those, like, the low-hanging fruit puns. If you can do 40 good puns, or even like, okay, good as
I specifically did some low-hanging fruit ones, but yeah.
But I think there's something to be said. So maybe I'm just jealous. Maybe I'm envious. Maybe I wish I could be a pun person, but I am not.
I mean, the point of low-hanging puns is not that they are good or amusing. It is to get the reaction out of everyone else.
This is very true, because some of my favorite puns are ones that, like, are corporate people make and put on marketing packages, that it's like, what is egg morning? That isn't even a pun. That's just, you just replaced good with egg.
That doesn't...
It's not a pun. But all right.
Yeah, sure. Sometimes I wonder, like, who tells them that that's good marketing ideas, you know? Like, who's the one who's giving them the data that says this is good?
It was like, there was like a Pringle one that they could have went with Merry Christmas, but they said like Jingle Pringles or Jingle Merry or Merry Chip. I don't know what it was, but they could have done it, but they went a different route. Okay. Yeah. All right. So if people want to find you, I'm going to spell it out for them just in case. It's Ammourazzz. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me. This has been very good. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. You can find me on Twitter at RocketOrca, Kenny as @Wolfmere, and John is @CrosswaysGM. Tabletop Babble is part of the Geekspective Network. Go to Geekspective.com to check out all our other shows, or follow us on Twitter @Geekspective. Our theme music was provided by the Battle Bards.